Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to our Your Home, Your Title webinar with MG Residential's Daniel Walcott and featuring Universal Titles, Katie Griffin. We appreciate you guys coming on here on today. And, we were just coming from contribution, really sharing some important information about the title process when it comes to buying or selling a home. And, we have really great presenters here on today. So if you have any questions or concerns or anything like that, at some point, just leave it in the comment section or chat box below, and we'll be able to reach back out to you and answer those questions for y'all. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our lead agent of the day, Daniel Walcott. And yes, sir, take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. As you said, my name is Daniel Walcott. I'm a real estate agent here in the DMV area. And I'm a part of the MG Residential Real Estate team. We are a full service real estate team in the area. And one of our mission is actually to transform lives, careers, and communities through real estate. And one of the ways that we do that is through these webinars where we're able to peek open the curtain and provide some insight into what goes on behind the scenes. So a lot of times we find that our clients are looking for information, are looking for guidance when it comes to their purchase transactions, when it comes to their real estate investing. And so what we like to do is each month just host a different webinar such as this, where you're able to get more in-depth details from professionals who are actually in the industry. And so I want to introduce Katie. Katie and I have been working together for a few years now. Katie, I actually think you did my first buyer's transaction when I first got to the business. I believe you were the first attorney to do my settlement. We've been rocking and rolling ever since. So it's been great. Again, my name is Daniel Walcott. I'm originally from Long Island, New York. I've been here in the DMV for the past, I want to say 10, 11 years. And I've been licensed for the past 5. And so Katie and I have been working together for the past 5 or so years. Katie, you mind just telling everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Not at all. I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia. I have been working as a title attorney in DC since I bought my first home in DC, which was in 2006. So I'm a little over 15 years in at this point, specializing in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, title insurance, title clearing, title settlements, and your title contract needs.
Awesome. Perfect. So let's get into it. I have a ton of questions. I was actually really, when Asher had proposed this topic, I was really excited to do this with you because I get a lot of questions all the time, not necessarily around title, because I think people don't really understand the actual title and title company aspect to it, but a lot of questions that have to do with home ownership and title on that end. And so I think they're going to get a lot of value out of this. But let's start with the question. Universal Title, like what does a title company do?
Yeah. So a title company wears several different hats during the course of a settlement. And I kind of break it down into sort of 5 different areas where we are helping a contract through a transaction. And that really is, we handle all of the money. We administer the contract. We get you from that place where you've signed the contract to where you're actually settling. Settlement documents. We insure the title, which is one of the largest, biggest, and best things that we do. And finally, we actually conduct the closing. We actually get to be in on that super fun moment where people are buying, selling, exchanging keys, and celebrating.
Okay. And so it's funny because you had said something. I want to make sure that the people catch it. You say that your job as a title company is to manage the contract, right? You guys are attorneys, but you're not representing the seller. You're not representing the buyer. You're representing, if I'm correct, the transaction itself. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And where that becomes super important is that when you're going through this process, the buyer has an able real estate agent to represent them. The seller hopefully also has an able real estate agent to represent them and represent their needs. But what if those two sides of the transaction aren't seeing eye to eye? Having the title company there as a neutral group of attorneys and real estate experts to kind of help you get over that hump and navigate that disagreement can be priceless.
Absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned that, because when you think about it, especially as a home buyer, it's so beneficial because you have quote unquote free representation from a buyer's agent, because our commission is paid for by the seller side. And now you're saying you also have an attorney that may not be representing you, but still has the contracts, and if your needs align with the contract, which I hope it would, has your best interest to get the deal done. And so not necessarily free advice, but you don't have to hire an attorney to come to the table. I have clients ask me that all the time. Hey, we're 2 weeks out, we're a week out from closing. Should I bring an attorney with me? And to that you say,
yeah, you know, it is very true that in different jurisdictions, different things happen. Some places you do hire an attorney to come to you with you to the table, and it's a huge expense. What we end up being able to do, and one of the things that I think sets my company apart from many that are out there, is that we do have highly trained and experienced people who can, you know, if you have the other side of the transaction is being unreasonable, you can kind of sit there and say, hey, listen, you all agreed to this, and I don't have, you know, I don't have a dog in this hunt, but this is what you agreed to. This is what's written, and this is really where we need to perform. This is what we need to do. So you do have someone who is looking at the legality, the ins and outs of the agreement to make sure that what you agree is actually what happens.
Right. And so let me ask you this, because as we're sort of talking about title companies, in my experience, when I talk to buyers, they don't really know what a title company is. When they come to me, I'm the first person to introduce, to bring that sort of into our world. And so in your opinion, as a first-time home buyer, or as a buyer in general, what should somebody look for in a title company?
It's a great question. And in a lot of ways, I want them to start by taking into consideration the advice of that trusted professional that they've already hired, their real estate agent. So as a buyer, you do a handful of transactions in your life. As a realtor, they're doing a handful of transactions weekly or monthly. So they really know what is going to separate that quality title company from one that might just be okay. From one that might be less than okay. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that you really need to, if you're trying to make a really informed decision, you should call and talk to one of the title attorneys that works for the title company, and ask them just a little bit about what they do. We all take those calls. We're all happy to take those calls. And I understand in the process of going under contract and getting to closing, you don't frequently have time to really vet a title company. That's where your agent's recommendation comes in. But if you have the time to do it, just give us a call and let us talk to you a little bit about what we do. Without a doubt, the people who do this well enjoy doing it. And that should be something that you can hear when you speak to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the, it's sort of one of the benefits of having an agent that you trust is the recommendations that come along with that. Because as you mentioned, once you're in the hustle and bustle of putting in an offer, going under contract, writing offers, a lot of these things that we talk about ahead of time really just go out the window. It's like, okay, well, now I need a home inspector, I need a title company, I need this, I need that. And so you're absolutely right. That's our job there, is to sort of guide the buyers to say, hey, look, I've worked with this person many of times. We've had tons of smooth closings. They fight to make sure the contract goes to closing, and everything typically goes smoothly. And if not, they're literally there to put out the fires. And I think that's one of the great parts about a title company that you can trust. You had mentioned the process when a buyer or seller goes under contract, right?
Mhm.
And so there's a couple things, as you know, that go on simultaneously. From a title company's perspective, what happens behind the scenes? What happens with you guys once you get a ratified contract?
Well, one of the very first things we do, we kind of kick into job one, which is handling money. So you give us a contract, we're also going to receive the earnest money deposit from the buyer at about the same time. And one of the things that I think is important for buyers to know is that when you hand over your earnest money deposit to the title company, you're really only saying like a temporary goodbye to that money. It's going to come back and meet you at the settlement table, because that money is part of your down payment. And it is the part of your down payment that gets held so that we can make sure that the buyer is going to perform under the contract. So we are starting that process, opening a file for the contract and putting some money in it almost immediately. The other thing that we're doing almost immediately is reviewing the contract, making sure we know what the parties have agreed to, because a lot of that agreement will translate into line items that need to appear on the final settlement documents. So we're grabbing the money, we're opening the contract and reviewing it, and we start immediately with what is called a title search or a title abstract. And that is the search of the title that we do to make sure that when this all gets done, we can insure the title for the new owner.
Okay. And so this process, as we know, when purchasing a home, it can take anywhere between, if they're really fast or if it's a cash deal, 2 weeks. Typically, we're seeing around 30 days, if not more, depending on the transaction. And so this process for you guys can happen within that time period.
Yes. Now, if we're doing a 2-week closing, you mentioned a cash transaction. One of the things that we do is prepare the documents for closing by coordinating with the lender if there is one. And so that adds a level of complication that we have to address, and that takes a little bit more time. But yeah, as far as getting a title search back, that can be done in a matter of days. And if that gets done in a matter of days, then we are reviewing it quickly. We're preparing the things we need to prepare quickly, and we're going to closing quickly. It can give your buyer some flexibility to make their offer attractive if you've got a title company who can really kick it into high gear and get closing done quickly.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I want to talk a little bit about the earnest money deposit. What guides a title company in handling the deposit, right? So I'm a buyer. I send you the deposit. We're good to go. A couple days later, I said, you know what? I don't want the property anymore. I don't want to upset the seller. I got bills to pay. I want this deposit back. Can I call you up and say, hey, can you wire me back the money? I made a mistake.
Unfortunately, no, I can't. When you put earnest money down, it is just that. It is to show that you are earnest about the contract that you have signed. So there are lots of opportunities, or there can be lots of opportunities for buyers who have changed their mind about the property or the process to stop the process and potentially get their earnest money back. But you have to come to an agreement between buyer and seller as to what's going to happen there. And that is not to say that buyers don't get their earnest monies back all the time. They really do. But it is always because there's been a specific agreement that allows that to happen. So you are putting money on the line when you sign a real estate contract. And in this area, that's extremely important because, it has not always been a buyer's market. Sometimes you need to have that incentive for the seller to know that you as the buyer are serious about making this happen.
Right, that's exactly right. And so what's interesting is you put here as far as receiving whole buyer's down payment. And so contrary to popular belief, although a lot of times you'll have a lender involved, the buyer's not sending the money to the lender to purchase the home. They're sending the money to you.
That's exactly right. we are the clearinghouse for the money. And that's important to remember too, because we are a neutral group of heavily licensed professionals. So we are holding your money safe, sacrosanct. I don't even earn interest on it. Like, it is your money that is just hanging out with us until the deal is done. And so the earnest money comes in, then your lender will send money to me as well. And then you will give me, as the buyer, your last little chunk of change. And when I have all of the money that I need, we come to closing, and then I start sending money out. And that's the point at which the seller would get paid. That's the point at which commissions or taxes would get paid. That's the point at which, if the seller has a mortgage, if the seller's mortgage gets paid off. So we gather all the money in, and then once the deal is done, we start sending money back out, so that ultimately what I'm left with is just what I got paid to do the transaction.
Makes sense. And so the second piece, the first part is handling the money, right? The second piece is administrating the contract. And you had mentioned before that you are a neutral party.
Mm-hmm.
You don't represent the seller or the buyer, and I think that's extremely important. So at the table, you're there, and sometimes both parties are there at the same time. Other times they sign separately, but you're there to walk them through the contract. You're that advisor for them.
That's exactly right. And so on the day of settlement, we're going to start by reviewing a big list of numbers, which is really all of the money that has come into my escrow account and all of the money that is getting charged out of my escrow account on the transaction. It's going to look like a balance sheet where the buyer says, okay, I'm spending $200,000 on the house, and then I'm getting in $150,000 for my loan, and I'm paying X and Y and Z, all the way down to we get to their bottom line. And on the seller's side, the same thing is happening, where we see how their money comes together. So we go through that. We go through all of the buyer's loan documents. We review the deed for the property, and we basically make sure that a buyer, from start to finish, in an appointment that's usually about an hour, has a chance to review and understand all of the documents that go along with home ownership and with having a mortgage.
And so you, go ahead.
If, however, buyer and seller come to the table and we have some form of a problem, that's also where it makes a big difference if you have chosen a good title company to help you navigate that dispute. Because, you know, if you can think of something that could go wrong at a settlement, chances are that I have seen it and dealt with it. And over time, that really means that you have the ability to look at a problem that might seem huge to the people that are in the midst of it, but come up with a pretty reasonable solution that everyone can be happy with, so that we can still get where we want to go. All of this is, you know, a seller who wants to sell and a buyer who wants to buy. So little things like, you know, a hole in the wall or a leak in the roof. They're things that we can deal with as long as we have everyone ready to come to the table and deal with it.
Yeah, I find that the easiest transactions are the ones where expectations are properly set, right? If you're dealing with a seller, you let them know, hey, this is what we have to do to sell the home to make it right for the buyer. As a buyer, the seller, you let them know that the seller is contractually obligated to do these things, not necessarily to go above and beyond. I mean, if they do, that's great, but there's an absolute minimum. And so there, those, as long, I feel like set those expectations, we can minimize the disputes. I mean, of course, as you mentioned, things happen that are out of our control. However, you're there to help mediate that.
Yes. And, you know, rightly or wrongly, it's one of the things about my job that I really like. Like, I mean, sometimes, you know, getting to sink your teeth into a problem like that and help people figure out what a solution that works for everybody is. I mean, it's one of the more interesting things that I get to do.
Yeah, and it's funny because me too, to
Yeah.
a certain extent. I think
Yeah.
certain problems, it's fun to really just work to come up with a solution for it. And it's interesting because we haven't even got to necessarily to title issues, right? Because that's another thing that you're sort of there to help guide both the buyer and the seller through. These are just contractual disputes,
Right.
right? Got it.
And yeah, as many different people there are different definitions of what the property's condition should be when they come to closing. But the good news is that we have a contract that says exactly what it should be. And so administering those sorts of disputes is part of what we do. I will say that not all title companies do that. I know that there are plenty of people out there who feel like their involvement in the contract, even as a neutral party, should be basically non-existent. I feel that if we are not stepping in as a neutral party and looking at the contract with people and helping them there, that we're really missing an opportunity to make a closing go well.
I agree 100%. And I actually didn't really think about that, but that's one of the reasons that I've taken a liking to you and Universal Title is because you guys are really always there, not just at the settlement table when we have a dispute, but my job as the agent is to get ahead of any potential issues or things that may come up. And so I may call you before we even have a problem and say, hey, this is sort of what we're looking at. I've read this, I heard about this, a client asked me about this, like how can we sort of walk through that? And we've had a lot of those conversations over the years. So certainly appreciate you for that. Next, preparing the settlement documents. So we touched on, you had mentioned the Alta statement, which reads as a balance that shows what is going towards the seller, what's coming from or going towards the buyer. Is the deed, is the signing of the deed, did that actually take place at the table as well?
So the signing of the deed takes place at the table with the seller.
Okay.
So in our current environment, and really just with everyone's busy schedules, we frequently don't have the buyer and seller sitting together at settlement anymore. When the seller signs documents, the seller signs the deed. And this is one thing that causes a lot of confusion for people. What is the deed? What is title? People talk about having title to a property. The deed is the recorded document that gives you an ownership interest. And when we talk about title, we're really talking about ownership. Who owns the property? So the title to the property really is the deed. And it differs from the title to a car, for instance, in that the title to a car, you really need to have that piece of paper to prove that you own the car. With the title to property, the actual piece of paper, the deed, gets recorded in the land records, and then it comes back to you as the owner. And what's most important about that deed is that it is recorded. It is not like your car where your bank, if you have a loan on your car, is going to hold that title until you've paid it off. With real estate, I am the owner from day one, but my lender, if I have one, just has an interest in the property. And that interest in the property is secured by their mortgage documents, which we will help them prepare in order to get to settlement.
Right.
So you mentioned that there are a couple of different processes that are all going on at once. So while I am handling the money, while we are administering any contract disputes if we need to, while we are checking the title to make sure the title is clear, the title company is also coordinating with the buyer's lender to make sure that all of the documents get prepared, that they all look correct, that they are all showing the right names, the right property, the right loan details, so that all of that can be signed. And that coordinating with a lender is a large part of what title companies do, just on a day-to-day.
Got it. Yeah, it's funny because it's not really until the end that the buyer may see it, where we're sort of going back and forth, and they may be asking questions about the final balance due, but the lender has to go to the title company, who then has to confirm back with the lender and make sure that everything's balanced, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that mean exactly? How does one have, in the beginning, how does one have different numbers than the other, or what is your side factoring in that maybe the lender doesn't have yet?
Yeah. So lenders frequently run estimates for their borrowers using fees that they have in their system. And those fees may be higher or lower than what the actual title company charges. So for instance, I may have a $1,000 settlement fee, whereas the lender has in their system $1,500. And so then you get an estimate from your lender early on, and then you get the final numbers and you're like, oh, that's good. I'm not paying quite as much in settlement fees as I thought. But a lot of that talking back and forth between lender and title company doesn't happen until after you're already under contract. In many instances, you're talking to your lender about closing costs even before you're under contract. Right. So what the title company does to help augment and supplement what the lender has already estimated is fill in the exact fees that we will be charging. And we also make sure that correct property taxes are charged. Property taxes are different from one jurisdiction to the next, and title companies end up being kind of the expert on what we think the taxes are going to be in the future.
Okay. Yeah, that's important because I'm talking to a lot of buyers. They are interested in what the property taxes are. And so we have access to some of the information that's on the MLS and in the tax records. But you're saying closer to settlement, they're going to get the most accurate number because that's going to factor into not only their monthly payments, but what they have to bring to closing.
That's correct. And what we frequently are trying to do with lenders is estimate what the taxes are going to be on the next bill. Because when your lender is estimating your monthly payment, they need to think about not what the taxes were, but what they're going to be. And that's sometimes more art than science. But we try very hard to work with lenders so that they are setting a realistic expectation for the borrower going forward on what their monthly mortgage payment is going to be, and insulate them against the big surprise 6 months from now when the taxes shoot up, potentially.
Right. I want to talk about insuring the title, but while we're on taxes here for a little bit, can you talk a little bit about how taxes are paid in the district? I know when you have buyers, they don't really understand how it actually works, why the lender is collecting money ahead of time for the taxes. And also, I'll stop there. I'll let you answer that first part.
Okay. So in DC, property taxes are collected every March and September. They are, they're bills that if they go unpaid, there's the potential that the homeowner could lose their home. So unpaid taxes can lead to a tax sale. And for that reason, lenders want to make sure that your property taxes get paid. They also know that as new homeowners, you may not know yet how to budget for your property taxes. So they roll all of that in for you in a mortgage escrow account, so that instead of paying out a tax bill every 6 months, the way that DC collects it, you're throwing that money into your monthly mortgage payment, budgeting basically for it, and then your lender will pay that tax bill on your behalf when it's due. The impact on your closing costs is going to vary a little bit depending on what time of year you close. If you close at a time of year when the property taxes are due in 2 months, then you may have to be collecting and putting more money together for a tax bill payment as part of your closing costs. But keep in mind also that whatever time of year it is, you are not going to be asked to pay taxes that accrued from before your ownership. So at settlement, you end up settling up between the buyer and seller to make sure that the seller pays for what the seller's responsibility is, and that you as the buyer are just paying going forward.
That's actually perfect. So although that my tax bill may change depending on the time that I'm closed, if I close mid-year, I'm not responsible for the time that I'm not in the property, that I don't own the property.
Correct.
And so, go ahead.
Well, and then DC also charges what I would call a sales tax when you purchase. DC charges what's called recordation and transfer tax. It's a tax that is generally split between buyer and seller. Your lender will factor that cost in when they're providing estimates for you right from the get-go. So this is not going to be a surprise extra. But one of the things that you can do to help insulate yourself against that is if you are a DC qualifying first-time home buyer, you have an opportunity to pay less recordation tax by applying for that benefit and letting the District of Columbia know that at the time of your closing. And that's something else that a good title company will help you do.
Yes, because people will forget. They say they will be a first-time home buyer, but they don't necessarily know that they should let you know. But you're in a position where you always ask. I've table, so I know, and I think that's pretty it's pretty important.
Yeah. So this is where it really becomes powerful to have a realtor that you know is up on all of the benefits and programs, a title company, a lender that you know is up on all the benefits and programs. So Daniel, you'll do your part by indicating on the contract that they're a first-time home buyer. That helps me know that I need to do my part and ask them the questions that I need to ask them to make sure they qualify. And then that has an impact on their closing costs of potentially thousands of dollars that I think a lot of buyers are unfortunately leaving on the table because they're not working with knowledgeable people to help them know what is out there that they can take advantage of.
Yeah, it's one of the ways where not having an agent who's knowledgeable about the home buying process and experience can actually cost you. Although you're not paying for it, it can cost you in the back end.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about insuring the title and what that means.
Sure.
When we talk about title, you had mentioned that title means ownership. And so one would assume if I get title insurance, I'm insuring myself or my ownership in the property, but does it work like that?
It does, but it's a very specialized and interesting kind of insurance. So most times when you buy insurance, you're insuring yourself, like say against damaging your car in a car accident or damaging someone else's car in a car accident. You're buying a policy of insurance that insures you going forward. With title insurance, what actually happens is that your title professional researches the history of your property, verifies that everything that the seller legally owns the property and can legally convey it to you. And then your insurance insures you for the rest of time that there is no problem with the title in the past that is going to rob you of your investment in the future. And it's a little bit of, it's a different kind of insurance. It is a very powerful way to make sure that the thousands of dollars that you're spending to build this future wealth is not going to be damaged by something that happened in the past. For instance, a lot of properties have had a deceased former owner in their history. You know, at some point, the owner of the property died and that property had to pass to that person's heirs to eventually be sold on. You know, one missing heir, one granddaughter who was supposed to get a share in the property and didn't. One creditor who didn't have a hospital bill paid at the time that the property sold can then create what people call a cloud on title. And I don't often use that term because I think it is sort of mysterious. Like, what is a cloud on title? It doesn't even, you know, It really is just an outstanding ownership interest, and it could be tiny or it could be large. And that outstanding ownership interest is the crack in the foundation that could mean that when you try and sell your property and capitalize on your investment in the future, you have a problem. So title insurance, as someone who works with it every day, is something that I see a tremendous amount of value in. It is fortunately an insurance that you buy for yourself just once when you buy the property. And then it insures you, again, the whole time that you own the property, that you're not going to find that title cloud that causes an issue for you in the future.
And so I think that's probably one of the best things about title insurance is that it is a one-time payment, typically paid at closing. And then from there you're covered. You really don't have to worry about anything. And so what you're saying is that if something were to come up, if something were to be missed in the title search, or if someone had a lien or ownership interest in the property, it's not, if I'm the owner, it's not my problem, right? I have insurance, the problem's gonna get solved.
Yeah. So what happens is that the title insurance company, you file a claim, the title insurance company actually steps into your shoes and defends your ownership. So an outstanding ownership interest, I mean, let's say a loan from a previous owner did not get fully paid. That loan is recorded against the property. It's secured by a property that you now own. So if they come looking for their money, you certainly want to be able to throw that title insurance policy at them and say, not me.
Right.
And then, if a title company doesn't properly file your deed or doesn't properly file the loan documents or release old loan documents, those are things that are covered under that policy. And I'm throwing this one out here now when I explain this to people too. I don't know if you've ever seen this late night infomercial that Newt Gingrich is doing now about title locking your home so that you're protected against fraud. I'll tell you right now, in DC, we offer, in all 3 jurisdictions, we offer an enhanced owner's policy of title insurance that covers you against post-policy forgery. So it would be like an instance of identity theft where someone puts a lien on your property after once you already own it. So it's interesting. The infomercial is fascinating and it's designed to be thoroughly frightening. But all I can say is don't watch late night infomercials and make sure you get title insurance because it does actually protect you against this stuff.
I always recommend title insurance. And unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's one of those things where it is optional. And so when buyers begin to do their research, they want to cut costs as much as they can. And so what they end up doing is saying, all right, well, what don't I have to pay? And title insurance is usually one of the things that come up. And so I get that question a lot, but I always recommend it because I've seen it provide a tremendous amount of value for my clients who's had some of the instances that you have brought up earlier with regards to liens that weren't caught or that came up after the fact that they were aware of.
And I'll tell you right now, I'm very sympathetic to the fact that we all want to keep our closing costs as low as possible. Ultimately, I think skipping your owner's policy of title insurance is not the best way to do that. We will talk to you, work with you, see if there are things that we can do to bring your title insurance premium down. If the previous owner of the property, if the seller has a title insurance policy in place already, there's a discount that can be offered on the new policy of title insurance. It can be substantial. So that's one thing that we can do. The other thing is in DC in particular, I've seen the title insurance pay for itself in quite a few instances, simply based on the fact that DC has an audit window on their property taxes where they can go back and revisit previous tax years up to 3 years back. And that's something like, even if I do the best possible job researching the taxes prior to closing, I can't say that that's not going to come up. And what's great about having title insurance is that if it does, even if we're just talking about, you know, $200 that would have been coming out of your pocket, title insurance is going to step in and take care of that. But it could go up to thousands of bucks that would come out of your pocket. And the title insurance would have to step in and take care of that too.
What's funny is that the buyer actually pays twice for title insurance. They have to pay for it on behalf of the lender and on behalf of themselves.
Yes.
But the lender's portion isn't optional. They need that.
That's exactly right.
That go away. It's only the protection for themselves.
Yeah.
That.
I think what's interesting about that too is if you think about it, of all of the lenders that are out there, so many of them competing in this marketplace, so many of them wanting to stand out, not one of them will skip having a policy of title insurance.
Nope.
So there's value there in that coverage that they recognize. And so listen, like I said, I am always sympathetic to people who are trying to keep their closing costs down. We are in an expensive housing market. Closing costs, keeping them low is crucial. So we always want to talk about it with a buyer who's thinking about skipping owner's title insurance. I am not a hard sell person, but we will do anything that we can to create a path for you to have the insurance because we believe in it.
Now, can you purchase a home that has a quote unquote cloud on the title? Because I think that's an interesting part too, is that I found that when something like that comes up in a transaction, it really brings everything to a halt. If you want to stop the sale of a property, they say put a lien on it. And so can you speak to that a little bit? Like, why does that throw such a wrench in the process?
Right. So insurance companies are by their nature cautious and conservative, right? We don't want to insure something that we think is going to be a problem in the future. So if we find something that seems to be a cloud on the title or a title problem, we need to have a path to resolution so that we are really confident that this issue is not going to cost money in the future before we are willing to insure the title. So just to back it up a step, the buyer's title insurance is optional. The lender's is not. If we can say to the lender, we can give you a clear policy of title insurance, we can go to closing. But let's say we have to say to the lender, well, we can give you a policy of title insurance, but it's going to say on there that if this old loan hasn't been paid yet, that it comes first. The lender's going to say, no, we're not closing under those circumstances. We can't do that. So I've got to figure out a way to find out that this loan from 1995 has in fact been paid, even if it's still showing up on the land records as unpaid. And that's the kind of title problem that we as the title company are clearing in that period of time between contract and close.
Got it.
Can you buy a property with a cloud on title? Yes. But what the title company is going to do is put responsibility for that cloud onto you as the new owner. And that is a circumstance that, you know, you can agree to if you want to. If you want to buy a property with a cloud on it, like we can probably figure out a way to get you that done. But the contract that you have signed as a buyer is going to say that you can't be required to do that. So the seller cannot demand that you take over some old title problem just because they want to go to closing.
Right. It has to be free and clear.
Yeah. The buyer and the title company's needs are very much aligned there, which is that we have to have a clear title before we close.
And so let's talk about the actual conducting of the closing. So we spoke about signing the documents. Both the seller and the buyer is going to meet separately with you to go over that. Buyers hand over the money, and then at that time they get the keys. So you're saying once the buyer signs last, once they sign on the dotted line, they're now a homeowner. Is that how that goes?
That's exactly right. It's one of the joys of my job is that the process can be tiring. It can be stressful. It is all of those things about making a huge and important financial decision in your life. But when you get to the end of it, we go through all of these documents. It can be a little numbing. There's a lot of signatures. You hand over probably more money than you have had in your hand ever in your life. But at the end of all of that, you're a homeowner. And I get to have that moment where we give you the keys to the property, we take your picture, we celebrate you, and you now own what is one of the most important investments that any of us ever make. So that is a real joy, and it can be forgotten through all of this process that when we come out at the end, we have a real life-changing, joyful moment for people.
Yeah, it is certainly life-changing, and I think there are, if all goes well, I mean, it's a positive experience. I've seen situations, I'm sure you've seen situations where things don't go so well. But the way we prevent that is by doing a final walkthrough. It's one of the most important pieces of the real estate transaction, because a lot of times the buyer haven't seen the property since the last time they were in it, which a lot of times is a couple of weeks prior for the home inspection. And so for the final walkthrough, it's important for them to actually see before they sign and get the keys, because like you said, after they sign, they are now the new owners, just no matter what the condition is. And so can you speak a little bit about the final walkthrough?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So you're right that a lot of times you're not living in this property while you're under contract for it. You at the end of the process, before it becomes yours, it's extremely important to make sure that that property is still in roughly the same condition that you all had agreed to. So, you know, if you show up at the property and there's been a huge rain the night before and now a bunch of water in the basement, this is something that you want to know before you sign on the dotted line. And sorry, I've got something in here with me. That's one of the things that an excellent realtor is going to help their buyers do. And I know that's one of the things, Daniel, that you and I have seen come up time and again, that you really need to be very careful about making sure that the property condition is as expected. And you and I have worked through issues before where it was not. And we need to then sort of troubleshoot, you know, are we closing today? Do we need to arrange for, you know, something to be fixed at the property, for some money to change hands so that something can be fixed at the property? It is one of the number one places where having an excellent team of professionals really changes the transaction. Because if you've got someone great representing you as a realtor, dealing with that sort of curveball is just much easier.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's sort of the way I view it, right? When I'm looking, if I was to hire a realtor, I want somebody that I can trust. And you don't really know that until things get sort of rocky, like, okay, like where is this person going to stand? Because it's interesting as an agent, and a lot of parties of the transaction don't get paid until you sign on that line. Mm-hmm. And so it's very easy to have an agent or a seller's agent or somebody acting unethically to say, hey, look, it's not a problem. Hey, that's not a problem. Sign, we'll deal with it after. Where I would advise all buyers, if there's an issue, we don't sign. Because once you sign, there's really nothing that I can do. And a lot of the times there's nothing you can do. And so I always tell my buyers, say, look, let's go by the contract. If there's something that's in the contract that is off or something that's wrong with the property, then we put a pause on things. But we don't go to the table, sign, and try to work it out on the back end from the seller, because they got their money and they're probably on their way to Mexico. So
yeah, I mean, you're so right. You never have more leverage as a buyer than you do while your money is still in your pocket. And when that money is in the seller's pocket, then, you know, all of the agreements in the world might still mean that you have to sue them to enforce those agreements. And that's not a situation that anybody wants to find themselves in. So you're absolutely right. If you don't have a really a realtor that you can trust, then I mean, you're potentially addressing that all on your own. And that's the whole reason to have a realtor, is so that you are not doing that all on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think next is just general questions. Katie, how much time do we have with you?
Oh, I got some time. I'm not
Okay.
I'm not heading anywhere immediately.
Perfect. So I did have some questions that were submitted that a little, maybe not outside the box for you, but out of the ordinary for title questions in general, right? And so
Okay.
I did want to talk about property ownership rights as it pertains to couples, siblings, parents, and children, and sort of how that works. And so, can we talk a little bit about married couples purchasing property?
Sure. Yes. I'm all for it. So, anytime you have more than one property owner, there are some choices that need to be made. So in a scenario where I'm buying a property on my own, I'm the sole owner of the property, right? That's easy. So now let's say I'm buying a property with someone else. If that person is my spouse, then we two together can take title as tenants by the entirety, which is a tenancy that has an automatic right of survivorship. So if you die, the property passes immediately to your spouse. Tenancy by the entirety is designed just for married couples or in DC registered domestic partners. And it is predicated on the relationship. So if in the future you divorce, you also lose that right of survivorship at the same time.
Okay.
In contrast, if I am taking title with someone who is just a boyfriend, girlfriend, or let's say a spouse, or I'm sorry, a sibling, a parent, a child, then those two people can take title as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. But also, let's say it's me, my mom, and my sister. We can all three take title as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. Tenancy by the entirety does not recognize the problem. So three would be joint tenants with the right of survivorship. And then if one dies, the property passes to the other two. And then the last survivor would become the sole owner of the property. So in a lot of ways, you can think of tenants by the entirety is how you take title with your significant other. Joint tenants is how you take title amongst family. And then the third option, when you have more than one homeowner, is called tenancy in common. And this is how I would say that you take title with a co-investor, right? So if I am on the title, let's again use the example of family, but I'm going to say I'm on title with my sister. We're investing in this property together. If I die, I want that to go to my heirs, whoever they are. If she dies, she's going to want that property to go to her kids. So at some point in the future, when my co-owner dies, instead of that reverting to me and me becoming the sole owner, I now own the property with the estate of my deceased co-owner. The other thing that you can do with tenancy in common is that if I've put up all of the down payment, then we could own it 70-30 or 60-40 or something other than equally.
And then you can establish that basically with you as you're figuring out, all right, how are we going to take title to this property? Just because you have two owners does not mean it's a 50-50 split. That's
exactly right. So let's say I've got boyfriend, girlfriend buying a home together. They're working out the financials, but they know that one person has more of an investment than the other. They can agree that they're going to own the property unequally. And, you know, there's a lot of things to consider there. We frequently recommend to folks, if you are buying property together and you do not have a family relationship or a committed personal relationship, you probably want to talk about all of those things that can go wrong in the future. Address them now so that you're thinking about them and knowing about them, because it is, buying property together is certainly a commitment.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what does that look like if I wanted to add or remove somebody from title after the fact? So
Yeah.
I'll break it up in parts. You have one where maybe you have a property, you have a partner, and you're saying, all right, well, he wants out of the business and he's okay with selling his portion or whatever we agree to. He's okay with walking away from this property. I want to remove him from title. But then adding somebody, if I was getting married, my partner had a property, does she now have to add me to title, or because we're married, I'm a shoo-in, I'm automatically in once we get married? How does that work?
There is no automatic.
Okay.
So if you want to add someone to be a co-owner of your property, you do actually have to file the deed that adds them to the deed. Now, this is separate from any sort of domestic laws that may say that she is entitled to some portion of your assets, or you're entitled to some portion of hers. But in terms of actual ownership of the property, a deed has to be filed to accomplish that. One thing to know, in DC, you can, without paying additional recordation and transfer tax, add or subtract a spouse, add or subtract a parent, add or subtract a child from title. But if you were doing a more complex transfer to a sibling, to a boyfriend, girlfriend, removing someone that you've never been married to or domestic partners with, that's going to trigger DC recordation and transfer tax. And that's really an interesting proposition, because, okay, let's say I buy a property with my girlfriend and I split up, I'm going to have to pay potentially quite a lot of money to get her off that title. And it's something to think about, know, and consider, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you are having to pay thousands of dollars to, you know, wind down a relationship that also involved real estate.
Makes it that much more complicated.
It does. It does. So I try not to advise on this much at all, because it's people's personal lives, but I do recommend that you think long and hard about it before you buy a property with someone other than a family member or a spouse, unless you've really thought through the consequences and probably written up some form of agreement to govern how you're going to handle it if you need to undo that in the future. Right.
And you spoke a little bit about investors and that whole dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have, or do investors typically buy their properties in an LLC, or are they transferring it after the fact? And what are the dynamics around that?
Yeah. Typically investors who are buying or who are owning a property as an LLC are buying it as an LLC. And here is why. Just like it would cost you a lot of money in recordation and transfer tax to get the girlfriend off title, it also is going to cost you a lot of money in recordation and transfer tax to transfer the property from yourself personally into your LLC. Okay. That is an unfortunate nuance in DC law, but the idea is that anytime ownership is transferring, unless you fall into some very specific exceptions, DC is going to charge you that recordation and transfer tax. And the LLC transfer triggers that. So usually if people want to own the property as an LLC, I highly recommend that they buy it as an LLC. Also important to note, if you are purchasing a property as a business entity, you just don't have the same loan options available to you that you have if you purchase as an individual. Mm-hmm. And that's purposeful. Your lender is taking more of a risk by lending to a business entity that insulates individuals under the law than if they are lending to an individual person. So, because if you transfer from yourself personally into your LLC, not only are you going to have to pay DC's recordation and transfer tax, but your lender is going to object to the fact that the person that they loaned money no longer owns the property. It's now owned by another entity, which is the LLC.
So you're dealing with two different sorts of, it's a catch-22 because by putting a property in an LLC, there are some benefits obviously around that, but at the same time, you're not getting the favorable financing that's available to individuals who own property.
I have advised clients in the past, you want to look at what you can get in a loan if you're borrowing as an individual versus an LLC. You want to look at the differences in your liability protection between buying as an individual as an LLC. And you want to maybe look at whether there is an insurance option that's going to offset some of that liability. You know, you may be able to insure yourself to an extent that it makes the cost difference between borrowing as an individual and an LLC less compelling. You know, there's a lot of different ways we can go about insulating ourselves against liability. And so an LLC is one option, but they want to think about all of their options and what the costs and benefits are.
And so you mentioned something that I wanted to highlight is that when you're dealing with a mortgage or a bank, they have some say, right? They have some say into what goes on. There's a difference between being on the mortgage and being on the title.
That's correct.
And so if I wanted to put the property in someone else's name, I'm putting them on title, but they necessarily don't have the same obligations as I do when it comes to the mortgage. Is that right?
That's correct. Who is on the loan? The person who's on the loan is personally obligated to repay the money. Mm-hmm. And then who is on the title is the owner of the property. And frequently those two things overlap because of course the property is the collateral of the loan. Mm-hmm. But let's say, and this is where I see this a lot, I have a married couple, one of whom works for the federal government, one of whom is works for themselves, is self-employed. Mm-hmm. The lender wants to give the loan to the person who works for the federal government. The self-employed person, their numbers, their finances are a little messier. They could certainly get a loan, but to fast track this whole process, they have just the federal government employee on the loan, but both of them are on title. So if at some point in the future, the loan is not being paid, the lender is going to first look to their borrower, the person who's on the loan. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, if they have to foreclose, both of those homeowners are in trouble, right? Because they are both owners of the home. Right. But only one of them is personally responsible on the loan. And all of this is good to know in that if you are working with a knowledgeable realtor and a flexible lender, you may have more options available for you than you knew about. I mean, let's say instead of just being self-employed, that second homeowner has some real credit issues in their past. You've got a possibility there of still buying a home and maybe not putting the loan in that second borrower's name, just putting it in the first. You can both still own the property, and that's going to give you the ability to get into that home that you want while you've got your second homeowner still rebuilding their credit.
Now, if I own a property and I wanted to give it to someone else, I didn't want to own it anymore, maybe I have a mortgage on it, and would I be able to just give them the property without selling it to them? Is that sort of, I don't know, I don't necessarily want to put a loophole because I actually don't know. But would it be possible to say, all right, well, instead of selling you the property, I want to give it to you, you're my family. I'm just going to put the deed in your name. I'm going to take myself off. It's your property now. Or does a sale have to take place?
So we see all the time where there are family transfers of property. So mom conveys to daughter. This is our family home. I'm just gonna give it to you. Certainly it's possible. If mom has a loan on the property, then that loan needs to be paid off when she conveys the property away from herself.
Got it.
So now, if mom does not have a loan on the property, fine, perfect. If mom does have a loan on the property, then we need to either arrange with the lender that the daughter is going to officially and formally take over the loan. That's called an assumption.
Okay.
Or in the alternative, and I've seen this too, daughter is going to get her own loan. So then it really is set up almost as a sale, where daughter is paying off mother's loan with her own new loan. And just because mom isn't netting any money off of that doesn't mean that money isn't actually changing hands.
Right.
I think
Makes sense.
Katie, sorry, Daniel, but like I think as you're talking about this thing, because I just came across some stuff back home as well in terms of family transfers and everything. This thing I came across recently called a gift of equity. When it comes to those types of things, it's definitely like kind of a it's more so for those family transfers. But like, can you explain? Have you experienced transactions that use that gift of equity piece where pretty much the money doesn't necessarily get into people's money or hands, but that money is essentially used to help with, say mother to daughter with closing and just, pretty much help pay off some of those closing costs as well.
Yeah. So, whenever we're talking about, so gift of equity is not a term that is necessarily used in DC in my business, but whenever we're talking about equity, we're talking about the untapped value in a home. So when I'm thinking about equity, I'm thinking about the difference between what the home would sell for, its value, and what I have obligated, my loan. And the difference between those two is what you can think of as your equity. And while you're living in your home, your equity is mostly untapped. It is this untapped wealth that is going to come to you when you sell. So in some ways, gifting equity, to me, that sounds like what would happen if I added a child to the title of my property. That essentially they are then entitled to a share of the kind of untapped potential, which is the equity in my home. And so that at some point in the future, if I die or if I sell the property, that equity would be partially theirs. But I do think that a gift of equity is a term of art that may be used in other jurisdictions and is not used here. One thing that we do in DC have is something that's called a transfer on death deed. That's a very interesting legal document that I record in the land records that says at the minute of my death, this property transfers immediately and directly to, and you can put in anybody you like.
So like a trust.
It's not a trust. It's actually an immediate transfer upon my death. So let's say I went out and did this tomorrow and I said, I put a transfer on death deed to my niece. And then I die. When my niece goes to sell the property, that transfer on death deed that I recorded is the deed into her that she must have my death certificate with. And then she's the sole owner of the property. And we didn't pay any recordation or transfer tax on that deed. It's a very interesting tool that some folks make use of for estate planning. And in that way, I can do a transfer without actually changing the title to the property during my life.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. So I saw a question from you, Asher, about air rights.
Yeah, so as you were talking about the different like tenancies and everything like that, I haven't heard of those terms since real estate school. So because I got my license in Jersey and then here in Maryland, so I'm like, oh wow, like all start coming together. And then I remember reading about air rights. So like with buildings and structures that are a certain height, they also own the air rights. The air essentially above that. So like what would that look like for investors or buyers looking to purchase at that level? I guess more so in the commercial space that's kind of more prevalent, but like
Yeah.
what it was, I'm just kind of curious, like what's that process look like in regards to the air rights piece with
Yeah. That's where you got me just like a little bit stumped. It's not something that comes up for me often. The only time that I have dealt at all with what DC has designated as an air lot was when I was working on the title for a larger commercial enterprise. In DC, those air rights have not traditionally been as big an issue, in part because of the height restrictions that we have in place for the city, but also as a general matter, in DC, we own our property fee simple. Fee simple means that I own the land on which my house sits in addition to my house. And also my lot lines go straight up, not all the way, but such that it's not like someone else can build over my house, right? Like that area is mine too. So to that extent, we do own the air rights over our homes, but I am not aware of a scenario in which most residential or commercial properties monetize that. And so I feel certain, just given that if something can be monetized, it usually is, that there is some form of regulation about that kind of prevents that from going on. But that is one of the things that does distinguish different areas is, for instance, in DC, we own everything fee simple. If you go up to Baltimore, some things are owned fee simple and some things are owned ground rent, which is this crazy concept in which you own your house, but you rent the land on which it sits.
Interesting.
huge up there in Baltimore.
Yeah. And it's all things that can be worked with and dealt with. And as a title company, we handle Baltimore as well. And we have learned to deal with ground rent and all that it means. But it's, every jurisdiction is different. It's why it's important to make sure when you're choosing a title company, I would say choose a title company where your realtor has got the attorney's cell phone number. You want to know that you have that direct connection when you need it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's all my questions. I love it.
All right, well, perfect. I think we could wrap it up here. I mean, Katie, this was amazing. I appreciate you as always, your wealth of knowledge. I really enjoyed this conversation. Asher, thank you for putting this together.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you guys for your time. And yeah, for those that are watching, again, thank you again for taking the time to really just do a deep dive on the title process. If you are ever in need of buying, selling, or investing in real estate in the DMV, please let us know. Definitely connect with me at Asher at mgresidential.com or Daniel directly at daniel@mgresidential.com as well. And he'll have great teammates such as Katie to get you through that process at your pace. So we're always here for you guys, buyers, sellers, investors. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. And until next time, guys, stay safe and have fun with real estate.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.